There are two new studies on vitamin D and COVID-19 that came out in September 2020. Find out the details here today on Jimmy Rants. Click on that little box down there in the corner. It'll take you straight to IGTV for today's episode. JimmyRants.com is the website, and as always, you can engage live in the content. Go follow me. I'm over on Instagram. I am at Livin' Low Carb Man, LIVINLOWCARBMAN. Once you're there, engage live. We're here Monday through Friday, always here trying to provide you guys good information. So be there, be square at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, Monday through Friday. So thank you for being here today. We also simulcast live over here on my Facebook page. So thank you guys for being here today as well. Finally, over on YouTube, we live stream for you guys as well. So thank you all for being here today on Jimmy Rants. If you miss a live, you can watch it on replay here on IGTV. We do put it up right after the show is over. We also put the past episodes up over on YouTube. Just type in the keyword Jimmy Rants. You can find the show. And then finally, pop on over to the official website for this show. It is JimmyRants.com. And once you're there, you can engage in the content there. Look at all the past episodes. Quickly coming up on 200 episodes, or excuse me, 600 episodes of this show. When you do as much content as I do, you sometimes lose count. It's 1,700 over on Livin' La Vida Low Carb Show, and now 600 on Jimmy Rants. So go check it out. But while you're at JimmyRants.com, definitely support the work. I have a Patreon page if you want to do a monthly donation, or you can do a one-time donation with PayPal. So all of those links, you guys, are at JimmyRants.com. All right, today, good Monday morning, you guys. I am so excited to share with you not just one, but two really incredible new studies that have come out on the subject of vitamin D and its relationship to the great pandemic we've all dealt with this year with COVID-19. And of course, everybody in the mainstream is all sitting on the edge of their seats, telling you to wear a mask, telling you to wash your hands, telling you to socially distance, telling you not to gather in groups of more than 10, telling you to do all these things and to stay at home. And meanwhile, they're all waiting for the vaccine. Oh, we got to wait for the vaccine. And once we get the vaccine, things can turn to somewhat normal again. Although Dr. Fauci came out the other day and said, well, just because we get a vaccine doesn't mean things are going to get back to normal. You're going to have to live with all these same restrictions for at least 2-3 more years. He said that, you guys. So in light of that, I think it's incumbent upon us as individuals to come up with our own prophylactic for dealing with COVID-19. And we already know about some of the effects that if you're in the early stages of COVID-19 and you're just getting symptomatic and you're not hospitalized, that hydroxychloroquine, zinc, and azithromycin actually can nip this thing in the bud pretty well. But what can you do even before it gets to that point that would be a preventative measure in protecting you against COVID-19? Literally everybody's trying to figure that out this year. And we've all been doing things individually to try to help protect ourselves, boost our immunity, and all the things. I'll tell you one of the things that I did, and I'm so glad I did, especially in light of these studies I'm going to tell you about here today. One of the things that I did very proactively, as soon as they locked us down in our houses, the first thing I did was bump up my vitamin D intake. I was already taking probably around 10,000 IU a day. Remember, this was March when they locked us down. So I was doing 10,000 IU a day at that time. Wasn't a lot of sunshine out. It was still cold. And so I decided to bump up my supplementation of vitamin D3 to 25 to 30,000 IU a day. And I did that just based on my own knowledge and experience with vitamin D and what it does. It actually acts like a hormone in the body. It's not really a vitamin. And so I thought, you know what? This is not going to be a bad thing. You can't get toxicity from that high of a level of vitamin D. And I'd taken as much as 50,000 a day for a period of time to try to boost the levels when I see it getting down. And so I did that on instinct. And then, of course, the summertime came. I backed off down to 10,000 IU. I used some from the Wild Superfoods company that my buddy Abel James, who's watching me over on YouTube right now, I took his vitamin D complex, which had all of the fat-soluble vitamins at wildsuperfoods.com, A, D, E, and K, all in there. I ended up doing 10,000 IU of vitamin D through that, plus getting regular sunshine. So I have a privacy fence in my backyard, and I very happily get back there with my chickens, completely buck naked, letting all that sun just hit my body. And I'm out there for a good 15, 20 minutes. It feels good. I'm grounding on the ground while I'm getting the vitamin D production from the sun. It's glorious. And so I haven't had to take as much. Well, now that it's getting cooler and we're going to start having shorter days again, I'm going to start to bump up my vitamin D again. Until this has passed and I'm sufficient levels, I haven't been able to test my blood levels in a little bit, but see that I have sufficient levels of vitamin D, I'm not going to change the protocol at all. So guys, I have two, and if you just joined us, I have two studies I want to tell you about that literally just came out within the last couple weeks. And these studies are all about vitamin D and COVID-19. Now, other than Dr. Fauci was on an Instagram Live with Jennifer Garner recently, I posted this on my social media pages, and he admitted in there, oh yeah, I'm taking vitamin D on a regular basis, and I think people should be doing that. I'm thinking 6 months after the pandemic starts, this is the first time we're ever hearing Dr. Fauci talking about vitamin D in a positive way. He also mentioned vitamin C as well, which we did a Jimmy Rants on recently. So vitamin D is so critical. Well, now we have some studies to back it up as it relates to COVID-19. So we're going to get to this first one. The first one was published in PLOS ONE, PLOSONE is the name of the journal. And this was published in the September 17th, 2020 edition. That was just a few days ago, you guys. And so this is huge. It's a research article, and it is a vitamin D research article, which when I saw Michael Hollick's name as one of the researchers, he is the preeminent researcher of vitamin D, you guys. So he's been out there for years. I've interviewed him on the Livin' La Vida Low Carb show, big time into vitamin D for your health and its criticalness in your health. All right, so the name of the paper, again, PLOS ONE, PLOS, second word ONE, that's the journal. It was published September 17th, 2020, and the name of the paper, SARS-CoV-2 positivity rates associated with circulating 25 hydroxyvitamin D levels. So that's basically your blood levels of vitamin D. Until treatment and vaccine for coronavirus 2019, COVID-19 becomes widely available, other methods of reducing infection rates should be explored. This study used a retrospective observational analysis of de-identified studies and tests performed at a national clinical laboratory to determine if the circulating vitamin D levels are associated with severe acute respiratory disease known as coronavirus 2, known as SARS-CoV-2 positivity rates. So basically, they wanted to see, looking at analysis of data that was already out there, this is the observational part of this study, if there's any correlation between vitamin D levels and people who get a positive COVID-19 test. So over mid-June 2020, they matched the vitamin D levels from the preceding 12 months. They looked at zip code data to match up the U.S. Census data and determine what the race and ethnicity proportions and latitude are. They had a total of 191,779 patients with a median age of 54 years old. 68% of them were female. And they wanted to see the SARS-CoV-2 positivity rate, and they determined it was 9.3% of those people got COVID-19. So then the positivity rate was higher in the 39,190 with deficient levels. So that's interesting. And then it was 27,870 of those who had a positive COVID-19 tests with adequate levels. So deficient in this study was defined as under 20 grams, as one of my lights just went out. That's never happened on Jimmy Rants before. One of my spotlights just ran out. This is why I have multiple. So if one goes out, you can still see my face. So deficient is under 20 grams. Okay. Adequate levels, and then it just came back on again. Oh, it's my cat. Are you messing with my plug over there, Skunk? Will you please stop doing that? I'm doing a live show. They're waiting for all the details of this study, and you just messed that up. She's staring at me like, what, Daddy? I didn't do anything. So deficient levels, under 20. Adequate levels, somewhere between 30 to 34. And then 12,321, which is the lowest amongst the group that got the positive rate, was more than 55. Okay, so what they found was the association between vitamin D levels and COVID-19 positivity was best fitted by the weighted second order regression, which included strong correlation in the total population and in analysis stratified by the demographic factors. So they're going to explain that here in a second. This association between lower levels of positivity rates with the higher levels of vitamin D levels remains significant across every demographic that they ran. COVID-19 positivity is strongly and inversely associated with your level of vitamin D in the blood, a relationship that persists all across races, sexes, and ages. Our findings provide impetus that we need to be exploring the role of vitamin D supplementation in reducing the risk for COVID-19. Guys, why isn't this headline news? Well, we know why, because everybody's waiting on a vaccine, and there's a lot of money to be made in a vaccine when you, for pennies on the dollar, can tell people to go take some vitamin D3 gel caps. Isn't it sad that we have put money and the pursuit of narrative over actually the health of people? And see, the more you think about this stuff, the more angry you get at the things they're making us do. Social distance, stay at home, wear a mask, wash your hands, which washing hands, okay, fine. But some of this stuff, but then they won't tell people stop eating the junk food. Take vitamin D and vitamin C, get some sunshine, go move your body. They're not telling us any of those things. And so here we have a study that says, hey, look, we're actually seeing really good results with the people who choose to take vitamin D and have sufficient levels in their blood. And here's the thing, guys, most Americans don't. Most Americans are highly deficient in vitamin D because they've been scared half to death of the sun, so they don't get in the sun. Or if they do get in the sun, they put this toxic sunscreen on their body and they don't get any of the absorption of the vitamin D that way. You don't. So it's good that we have a study. So let's see. The introduction. Studies suggest an association between vitamin D deficiency and the risk of viral upper respiratory tract infections and mortality from COVID-19. This relationship is anticipated given that vitamin D has numerous actions affecting both the innate and adaptive immune systems. Respiratory monocytes and macrophages and epithelial cells constitutively express the vitamin D receptor. So acting through this receptor, vitamin D may be important in protecting you against these respiratory infections. In addition, one of the important actions of vitamin D, listen to this, is to suppress excessive cytokine release, known as a cytokine storm, which happens as soon as COVID-19 enters your body. The role of vitamin D supplementation in reducing this risk of infection by COVID-19 has not yet been studied well. Better understanding of the relationship between vitamin D status and these positivity rates for COVID-19 is appropriate before evaluating this potential intervention. So they've looked at some of the previous studies looking at COVID-19 outcomes related to vitamin D. Only 2 studies investigated the direct relationship, and they came to opposite conclusions. One said higher levels of vitamin D didn't matter. The other one said higher levels of vitamin D did matter. Both were based on very small numbers of results of positive cases of COVID-19 and 25 hydroxy vitamin D levels, and neither involved anybody in America. In this study, we're evaluating the association of vitamin D levels with positivity for COVID-19 as assessed with the nucleic acid amplification testing. So that's the test that they use to determine COVID-19. All right. So again, they looked at all of these results out of Quest Diagnostics. They looked at unique patients identified with a COVID-19 positivity test from March the 9th through June the 19th this year. They looked at their vitamin D levels from the preceding 12 months, and analysis was limited to one COVID-19 result per patient. Patients were considered to have a positive result if any test indicated positivity. When multiple were available, the most recent was selected. They excluded specimens with inconclusive results or missing data because they wanted to be as thorough and accurate as they could. So they used one of the 4 tests for COVID-19, so I don't need to get into that. And we already talked about the lab ranges for vitamin D, what they were looking for and what they meant. All right, so let's get to the nitty-gritty of this. So the potential cohort had 218,372 patients after excluding the patients that had messed up information. That gave them 191,779, which was 87.8% of the original population of patients for analysis. It had people from all 50 states as well as the District of Columbia. There was an association between positivity rates and higher levels of vitamin D. I'm trying to see if there's anything. Oh, and they showed you a curve. Look at this. So you can see that the level of vitamin D is pretty good correlated with COVID-19 cases. And so this is the level of vitamin D, and this is the level of cases of COVID-19. So vitamin D, COVID-19. So vitamin D, COVID-19. So with the lower levels of vitamin D, which is on this end, you had the higher levels of COVID-19 positive. With the lower level, or the higher levels, of vitamin D, you had the lower levels of COVID-19. Very nice little curve there on the chart. So the positivity rates were higher in those 9,529 patients from predominantly Black, non-Hispanic zip codes, as well as the 26,242 patients from the predominantly Hispanic zip codes. So this is huge, you guys, because those are the ones that are at greatest risk of COVID-19 and having the worst effects from it. And so they were looking at those populations because they also tend to be the ones that have lower levels of vitamin D in their blood. Because of the pigment of their skin, they don't convert it nearly as well as white skin does. And so this is a problem as well. That's the population, guys. I think if they were going to help people and give them some kind of a prophylactic to prevent COVID-19, I think they should have made it very abundantly loud and clear. Hey, if you are a minority population, you're at most risk for this. If you're obese, you're at most risk for this. If you have comorbidities, you're at most risk for this. All of those groups better darn well be upping their vitamin D intake. Now, of course, we know why they wouldn't do that. They don't have any desire to do that. There's no money to be made in that. And yet that would have saved a lot of lives had they just simply done that. So, I don't want to get too lost in the weeds in this study. But in the discussion, these results demonstrate that there is a direct inverse relationship between the level of vitamin D in the blood and a positive COVID-19 test. For the entire population, those who had a circulating level of vitamin D of less than 20, which is anemically low, had a 54% higher positivity rate compared to those who had a blood level of 30 to 34, which is that adequate level. The risk of COVID-19 positivity continued to decline for those patients that had 55 or higher on their vitamin D level. This finding is not at all surprising given the established inverse relationship between respiratory viral infections, including influenza, and vitamin D levels. So they conclude vitamin D supplementation may actually be needed to reduce acute respiratory infections, especially in those people that they know have a vitamin D deficiency. A previous study found that each 4 nanogram per milliliter increase in circulating vitamin D levels was associated with a 7% decreased risk of COVID-19. This is remarkably similar to the same risks that are involved across all studies of all coronaviruses. Pretty neat, right? Patients with the lowest levels of vitamin D had a 5 to 7% higher absolute positivity risk of COVID-19 across northern, central, and southern latitudes. In other words, wherever you are in the world, if you have lower levels of vitamin D, you have a 5 to 7% absolute higher risk of getting COVID-19 positive. Indeed, COVID-19 diagnoses and particularly mortality exhibit a decreasing worldwide north-south latitude gradient. In other words, it doesn't matter if you live in an area where you get more sun or not. It doesn't matter. If your levels are low, you're going to have more susceptibility. This inverse relationship between COVID-19 positivity and vitamin D was most striking in the predominantly Black, non-Hispanic zip codes, as well as the predominantly Hispanic zip codes. Although vitamin D levels appeared to play a role across all races and ethnicities, patients from predominantly Black, non-Hispanic zip codes had higher COVID-19 positivity than those from predominantly white, non-Hispanic zip codes. Other potential reasons include chronic disease that already existed. That's those comorbidities we were talking about. Maybe their occupation puts them more at risk. Housing, maybe they're crammed together in housing. And lifetime risk exposures to everything. So maybe they have some environmental things in their life that made them more susceptible to this causing problems. Limitations of this study include the testing for COVID-19 was based on selection factors, including presence and gravity of symptoms, exposure to individuals infected. High-risk groups such as healthcare workers and first responders are also more likely to be tested than others. Another limitation is that race ethnicity estimates were based on aggregate U.S. Census proportions by zip code, so they kind of guesstimated this. But if you can look at a population and look at their zip code and see what the preponderance of the breakdown is, I think it's a pretty good, logical, educated guess. There may be other potentially confounding variables that were neither identified nor controlled in the study. As expected, the multivariable model displayed poor overall fit and correlation, given that COVID-19 can infect anyone. The intent of the model was just to determine whether having circulating levels of vitamin D remained significantly associated with positivity for COVID-19 or not, and it did. The major strength of the study is the direct assessment of circulating vitamin D levels in a large cohort. This approach can more clearly elucidate this relationship of vitamin D to COVID-19 positivity than is possible using other measures. In conclusion, the positivity on these tests is strongly and inversely associated with circulating levels of vitamin D, a relationship that persists across every single thing you can measure. Our findings provide further rationale to explore the role of vitamin D supplementation in reducing the risk for COVID-19. If controlled trials find this relationship to be a causative factor, the implications would be vast and would present, listen to this guys, a cheap, readily available method for preventing infection, especially in those who have a vitamin D deficiency. This could be of increased importance for those in the African American community as well as Latinos and who are disproportionately being affected by COVID-19, and they're the ones more likely to have a vitamin D deficiency. In the interim, the authors recommend responsible vitamin D supplementation based on your personal need, risk factors, and advice from your physician according to existing Endocrine Society guidelines. So guys, you need to know what your vitamin D level is. Have you had it run before? Have you had it run recently? The last one I had run, I was in the 60s. So really anything over that 55 is in a good optimal level. They say on the test that, well, if it's 30, that's considered, within range. Okay, within range is not what you want. You want a therapeutic level. So if you can, get your vitamin D level tested, see where you stand, and then from there, supplement appropriately. I will tell you that when I go below 50, I get very vigilant about taking vitamin D along with getting sunshine exposure. And so we're getting into, here in America, we're getting into the fall. So the days will become shorter and eventually it's going to be winter and it's going to be very hard to get vitamin D from the sun. So think about a supplement strategy. And of course, people freak out about taking much more than the RDA. But the RDA for vitamin D is 400 IU. I poop 400 IU. Like, come on. You need significant amounts if you're going to move that needle. Remember, for every 4 points on your vitamin D, you're improving your chances against COVID-19. And so I very happily take 10,000 IU a day. As it gets cooler and less sunshine out there, I'm going to bump it back up to 20 to 30,000 again. And it's only because I know that it's doing good things in my body. And that study that I just read from you, Michael Hollick and others from Plus One, just came out on Friday, is huge. But it's not the only study on vitamin D that came out, you guys. I've got another one here. This is from the British medical journal Open Heart is the name of this journal. This came out, you guys, on September the 2nd. And the name of this study, Relationships Between Hyperinsulinemia, so high insulin levels, magnesium, vitamin D, thrombosis, and COVID-19, a rationale for clinical management. So in this paper, there are a few names you might recognize. Dr. James DiNicolantonio, so he wrote The Salt Fix, and he was a contributor to this study, as well as Dr. Aseem Malhotra, a very prominent cardiologist in the news media over in the UK, and they were a part of this with many other people that I could say their names, but you wouldn't know who they are. But let me read this one, and I don't want to spend too much time because I definitely want to hear what you have to say. What's your experience taking vitamin D? Have you been exposed to COVID-19? Have you had tests? What was your vitamin D levels? All that. I want to hear from you here in a second, but let me get to this study. Risk factors for COVID-19 patients with poorer outcomes include all the pre-existing conditions of comorbidities: obesity, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, heart failure, hypertension, low oxygen saturation capacity, cancer, elevated ferritin, CRP levels, which is an inflammation level. A common denominator, hyperinsulinemia, provides a plausible mechanism of action. Underlying cardiovascular disease, hypertension, and stroke, all conditions typified with thrombi. The underlying science provides a theoretical management algorithm for the frontline practitioners. Vitamin D activation requires magnesium. Hyperinsulinemia promotes magnesium depletion via increased renal excretion, reduced intercellular levels, lower vitamin D via sequestration into adipocytes and hydroxylation, activation, inhibition. They're a little more nerdy in this paper, so bear with me with the gobbledygook. I'll try to translate as best as I can. Hyperinsulinemia mediates thrombi development via fibrinolysis inhibition, anticoagulation production dysregulation, increasing the reactive oxygen species, decreased antioxidant capacity, providing or producing carbon monoxide, increasing deep vein thrombosis risk, increased heme synthesis demand upregulates carbon dioxide production, decrease in oxygen saturation capacity. Let's just put it this way. It's bad. It's doing all kinds of like dastardly things deep within your body that you don't want to have happen. Hyperinsulinemia also decreases cholesterol sulfurization to cholesterol sulfate, as low vitamin D regulation due to magnesium depletion and vitamin D sequestration and diminished activation capacity decreases this big long enzyme called SULT2B1B activity. consequently decreasing plasma membrane, blah, 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 blah. I don't get too lost in the language of it, other than to say they're telling you that your body, when you have high insulin levels, is depleting your levels of magnesium, and through the depletion of levels of the magnesium, that is pulling your vitamin D levels down. So in addition to taking vitamin D, make sure you're minding that you're getting enough magnesium. Guys, if we just took magnesium, zinc, vitamin C, and vitamin D, talk about a quadrant of things that could be a powerful pack-a-punch in fighting and protecting yourself against this COVID-19 virus. Everybody's running around in fear, but if you're eating real food and you're keeping your insulin levels low and you're doing all the things to try to get those nutrients that are deficient in your body up, you're going to be a whole hell of a lot better off than just about anybody else out there that's living in fear, waiting for a vaccine with bated breath. Aren't you angry that you're not hearing any of this on the mainstream media? We should be hearing studies like this being shouted from the mountaintop. And I think about like all of the medical professionals right now that are having to deal with patients coming into their office with this condition or fear of this condition. They're getting overwhelmed. And wouldn't this be really great information to be sharing with your patients? Couldn't we actually prevent COVID-19 before it develops? We're seeing the studies that prove it can. And again, it should make you angry that we're not hearing anything about this because, new cases of COVID-19. Okay, fair enough, but maybe we could prevent them before they even become cases. They haven't said a damn thing about any of that. And that's a shame. Patients with COVID-19 admitted with hyperglycemia, that's high blood sugar, and or hyperinsulinemia, high blood insulin levels, should be placed on a restricted refined carbohydrate diet. Amen. About time. Limited use of any kind of dextrose solutions. In other words, don't put in their feeding tube sugar, is what they're saying. Degree and level of restriction of carbohydrate is determined by your level of blood glucose, insulin, and ketones. Supplementing these patients with magnesium, vitamin D, and zinc should immediately be administered. By implementing refined carbohydrate restriction, 3 primary risk factors, hyperinsulinemia, hyperglycemia, and hypertension, all of those things increase inflammation, coagulation, and thrombosis risk. They will be managed very, very rapidly. So here's a study talking about low-carb ketogenic diets being very helpful. So I don't want to get too much into this one, but basically what they did was they looked at the people that had a correlation between their age and the prevalence of metabolic disease and all the comorbidities, which you've already talked about, and how those people are now at a greater risk of COVID-19 because of the cytokine storm that comes on. So again, carbohydrate restriction and all those supplements we just talked about, which includes vitamin D, are helpful. So hyperglycemia increases hemoglobin glycation damage. So think of glycation as kind of this sticky, syrupy kind of thing going on inside the body. And you don't want your blood to be this sticky, syrupy, because it then can wreak havoc in the body. So a study published in Diabetes Research and Clinical Practice analyzed 132 patients with COVID-19. They put them into 3 groups based on their A1C levels, which is a proxy marker for blood sugar. Results found a significant linear negative correlation between the levels of hemoglobin oxygen saturation and A1C. Hyperinsulinemia inhibits beta oxidation and ketolysis, thereby enforcing that cellular ATP generation from glucose substrate has to take place. Again, it's going to get in the weeds a little bit. I don't want to get caught up in that. Let's see if we can pick up that. What they did in this study was they looked at like these other studies, kind of like the other one. It's an observational cohort where they're trying to come up with what does this mean based on all this data that we already know exists. So vitamin D can be created in the skin via exposure to ultraviolet radiation from sunlight and consumed in the diet, talking about supplementation. The action spectrum for vitamin D is an ultraviolet of 280 to 320. The best time of sun exposure for the optimal vitamin D generation from sunlight at minimal risk of any kind of melanoma is noon. So when I'm done with Jimmy Rants, it will be noon here in South Carolina. That's usually when I go out in my backyard and I strip down naked and I get lots of vitamin D from the sun. It also is very comforting, especially it's kind of a little bit cooler today. So it's really nice when the sun hits your skin. It's a little bit chilly, but you get that warmth from the sun and you know that you're creating vitamin D when you do that. Other less investigated aspects of vitamin D, sun exposure, and blood coagulability may play a crucial role in the increased risk of poor outcomes in COVID-19, including the marker of hyperinsulinemia. Years of hyperinsulinemia that would manifest overt pathologies such as obesity, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, and cancer would come with an already heavy risk burden list. We already know that too because of all the people who have died from COVID-19, or at least with COVID-19. They have on average 3 comorbidities. And so you know if you're in that risk category, you know who you are. There's nobody's like, oh, I wonder if, no, you know, you've been diagnosed with heart disease and diabetes and you have obesity. That's 3, that right there. And so doing things that would lessen the effects of those comorbidities, carbohydrate restriction, vitamin D supplementation, and some of these other supplements we're talking about all play a role in helping and help quick. That's the other thing. This isn't something that you just kind of do and you have to do for a while to get the benefit. No, when you start carbohydrate restricting, when you start taking high doses of vitamin D and other supplements, you see a very, very rapid improvement in your ability to fight off this infection, not just COVID-19, but even the seasonal flu, which, by the way, we're entering that season as well. So all these things that they're talking about in this study that would be a preventative measure for COVID-19, they apply to other coronaviruses like the common cold and like the common seasonal flu. So these are all good practices regardless. Sunlight exposure driven photocatalysis has potential effects on less integrated or investigated roles in human health. One of the things that it does is it aids in the production of cholesterol sulfate. The majority is synthesized in the epidermis supplied to the bloodstream. It constitutes a majority of the blood sterol sulfates, blah, 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 blah. That gets a little bit deep in the weeds. I don't want to, this is a very consumer-friendly kind of show. I don't like to get real nerdy. I did a real nerdy one a few weeks back, and I struggled kind of getting through all the language and trying to interpret on the fly. But just know they're saying that it's good things when you can get your vitamin D level up through supplementation and sunlight exposure. All right, let's keep going here. Some of the methods for helping to reduce glucose and insulin include implementing a well-formulated ketogenic diet, a low-carb healthy fat diet, a low glycemic load diet, as well as dietary carbohydrate restriction. All of those are almost synonyms, but there's slight little differences between them. The choice and approach may vary for a myriad of reasons. While nutritional ketosis is demonstrated to be very safe, it's not necessarily your goal in this instance, whereas lowering glucose and insulin are the forefront of the pathological development of increasing risk factors. So while producing ketones and being in a state of ketosis would be a nice thing, and I do think those ketone bodies would produce some benefits as well, the primary thing is get the glucose down and get the insulin down. Now, usually when you lower glucose and insulin, what happens? You have an increase in your blood ketones. Implementing a method that helps patients get into a fasting mimicking state using any of the fasting mimicking diets, which has a phenotype of healthy blood glucose, insulin, and ketones, is helpful as well. There is no drive to calorie restrict. So don't cut calories when you could fast and fast mimic. Again, bearing in mind during acute care settings, the focus on lowering glucose and insulin through cutting carbs, whereas the focus is not trying to reach some kind of a ketosis goal. Uh, bu- 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 bu. It's important to note in the case of those who have type 2 diabetes as a comorbidity, if carbohydrates are ingested, blood glucose will elevate, ketones will go lower, and be absent due to insulin production in those with hyperinsulinemia type 2 diabetes. That will inhibit ketogenesis, producing ketones. So, your focus in clinical management in patients with COVID-19 in hospital is to aim to keep them out of the progression of going to the ICU, being put on a ventilator. See, this is the thing, like these poor patients that have been hospitalized because they have the symptoms of COVID-19, but then it keeps getting worse when they're in the hospital. They could be doing these things that they're talking about in this paper to prevent that. And I'm even telling you, even before it gets to where you're symptomatic and you're having to go to the hospital, long before, as a prophylactic, you could be doing all these things that I'm talking about in these studies today. All right. So yeah, they're basically giving a lot of instructions to doctors in a clinical setting. Here's what you can do, and it's a lot of the things we've already mentioned here. They did mention a few medications could help. Again, they're all the insulin regulating, blood sugar lowering kind of drugs. The glidazones, the GLP-1 receptor agonists, metformin, all of these things are things that doctors already know. So let's skip down to the discussion. While it is not clear what concentration of insulin is ideal for an individual patient in terms of functional concentrations that work in a healthy physiological homeostasis as opposed to chronic elevated concentrations that function in that pathological adaptive homeostasis and drives inflammation and pathological cellular outcomes, healthy glucose concentrations at the cost of hyperinsulinemia comes at a heavy price. In other words, if you have normal glucose but your insulin is through the roof, that's no bueno. No, it's not helping you at all. The goal is to get both glucose and insulin down. So those of you that test your glucose, well, I'm always in the healthy range of glucose. It's always good. That doesn't mean your insulin is always good. And this is where people sometimes make the mistake of, oh, my insulin levels are normal. And I'm like, how do you know? Do you test your insulin level? How do you do? Oh, no, my glucose is always normal. No, 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 no. Normal glucose does not mean normal insulin. Your body may, over time, especially if you're insulin resistant, shift that level of insulin higher and higher and higher in order to control your blood glucose. Your body's working very hard to keep your glucose into a very tight range. And the way it does that is through insulin and glucagon. And so if insulin keeps going higher and higher and higher and higher in order to keep your blood sugar in a normal range, that's going to catch up to you at some point. Approaches to achieve both a healthy glucose and insulin level, where very little does the job, should be managed from a top-down approach, where large changes in blood glucose are primarily driven by your diet. This is where the ketogenic diet comes into play, resulting in a subsequent need for more insulin, consequently driving a higher baseline of insulin, blah, blah, blah. Hyperinsulinemia drives mTOR production and diminishes cellular antioxidant countermeasures. They may be subtle, yet they are profound, such as decreasing NADPH production leads to lowered ability to activate this process called 25-OHD calcidiol to its biologically active form. Again, we're getting in the weeds a little bit, but the main thing is you're trying to cut down on those inflammatory pathways and those things that would exacerbate this hyperinsulinemia that they've been talking about being the big boogeyman. So implementing glucose restriction aids to resolve hyperinsulinemia and hyperglycemia and their twin effects in the outcomes of patients at risk for COVID-19 is the goal. Chronic stimulus of insulin secretion results in hyperinsulinemia, as well as all the downstream pathological things that take place. Glucose drives insulin secretion. Excessive dietary high carbohydrate diets consumed frequently and chronically drives pathological development of hyperinsulinemia. Clinical management should be focused on lowering carbohydrate consumption to manage both the hyperinsulinemia and the hyperglycemia, coupled with the lowering and describing of glucose management through medications as well as fast-acting and basal insulin. I don't think if they go carbohydrate restriction and do it well that they would need the insulin, but I suppose it's there if they need it. A decrease in dietary carbohydrate and its effects on lowering insulin leads to rapid changes in your blood pressure as well, requiring vigilant monitoring of any kind of antihypertensive drugs, as carbohydrate restriction and resultant decrease in insulin helps to bring regulation and normality to your blood pressure. Thus, through carbohydrate restriction, 3 of the factors, high insulin, high glucose, and high blood pressure, all of those things increase inflammation and coagulation, are rapidly managed. So, let me look at the limitations and conclusions, and then we'll come to you guys. So, blood glucose and insulin may reflect a high normal result. This may not be normal for that person. That's one of the limitations. We don't know what normal for the individual is in these people. Fasting insulin does not always identify hyperinsulinemia. One of the things that they said was a challenge was they didn't know what high insulin would be. I'm thinking anything in the double digits or higher would be high insulin and would be problematic. I think anything under 10 with your insulin levels would be considered in a better range. It must be emphasized that our proposed management strategy is only theoretical, based on all the biochemical principles and the practical strategies from dietary control of type 2 diabetes. So they're using the model of, we know what raises blood sugar and insulin and blood pressure in someone with type 2 diabetes is the dietary carbohydrate. So getting people to back off on that, it would make sense from a theoretical standpoint that would work under any setting. That's what they're saying. COVID-19 has placed unprecedented strain on many of the health systems, but has highlighted that metabolic health is the key to having good immune health. Something I've been saying from the start. Why don't we tell people how to make their immune system better, rather than say, live in fear, put on a mask, which makes your immune system worse, by the way, socially distance, stay at home, blah, 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 blah. No, that's all the things they tell us. They don't tell us anything about how to improve our immune health. But they could tell them about eating real food. They could tell them about carbohydrate restricting. But they don't. In conclusion, based on the underlying science, patients with COVID-19 admitted with high levels of glucose, high levels of insulin, should be theoretically triaged to immediately go on a carbohydrate-restricted diet. The degree of restriction and the level will be determined by the blood glucose, insulin, and ketone levels. Intravenous solutions should not include any dextrose, where at all possible. Additionally, supplementing them with vitamin D, magnesium, and zinc should be administered. Guys, why aren't these studies headline news today? Why did it take some podunk guy from South Carolina to come on his daily Jimmy Rant show? Why did it take somebody like me to bring these to the forefront? To me, that's the crux of where we're at here with this. We're not hearing all the information. So when I see these studies and I'm not hearing anything on the news, you try to look those up and see if there's any positive news out there in the mainstream of the media about vitamin D, about carbohydrate restricting, about doing all these natural things that don't cost a lot of money. Are you becoming jaded? Like I'm pretty jaded. Like I'm really getting upset because I've been in the nutritional health space now for over 15 years. And I've seen a lot of things that I just shake my head at. But this one takes the cake, guys. This one takes the keto cake, because I haven't seen this level of just totally ignoring health, all for the sake of what? Like what good is coming from keeping people in a state of fear? What good is coming from not telling them about taking vitamin D and zinc and vitamin C and getting sunlight, carbohydrate restricting, and eating real food? How profound could it be if from on high they were saying all these messages and they're not saying anything of the sort? And then everything they are saying is all predicated on supposed prevention, but nothing about protecting you. It's all about, I would say, window dressing protection. It's just sad to me. And now we have 2 incredible studies that came out just this month on vitamin D and how it is one of the determining factors with the level of COVID-19, how bad it hits you. Are you guys taking more vitamin D? I sure have since March. I just ran out. I need to go buy some more. So I think this is something that we need to be telling everybody in our life that we care about. If you're not taking very high dose level, and I would start at 10K. I would start at 10,000 IU of vitamin D. It's not going to harm you. People worry about that. A day is what I'm saying. It's not going to harm you. People worry, oh, am I going to get vitamin D toxicity? No, not at that level. And I've talked about that before. You don't get vitamin D toxicity until you go astronomically high, like 1 million IU a day for a period of time. Yeah, you'll get toxic from that, but not 10,000, not 20,000, not 50,000. It's just not going to happen. But I'm anxious to see what you guys have to say. We're going to come over here first to Instagram, then over to Facebook, finally over to YouTube. Thank you all for being here today on Jimmy Rants. JimmyRants.com is the website. See what you have to say. Bonnie says, they say we have freedom, but what about the freedom to knowledge? Well, that's why you're watching me, Bonnie, because you know I'm not afraid to tell you the truth. Although I will tell you, because I put COVID-19 in the title of this, I've been shadow banned. You guys found me, but I usually have a whole lot more people watching, and the delayed reaction of people coming on, I know it's because I put COVID-19 in the title. They might have even flagged vitamin D. Instagram actually shadow banned people who used hashtag sun as of like a week and a half ago. Sun, S-U-N. You can't put hashtag sun. They will shadow ban you. So it's disgusting what's happening. But that's another topic for another day. I'm not kidding you, Bonnie. I'm not kidding you. All right, thank you, Instagram. Let's pop over here now to my Facebook page. What's up, Facebook? See what you have to say about this one. Kira's commenting on Skunk interrupting my live. Yes, gotta love cats. They don't care about your live. No, she most certainly does not. She's over there sleeping now. Skunky. She's like, I'm undeterred by you human. Kelly says, my son was level 7, made a huge difference in depression. Wow. Oh, for the vitamin D level was a 7. Yeah, oh my gosh. That's anemically low in vitamin D. And yeah, it does start to work neurologically at that point if you have that low of vitamin D. We don't realize how critical vitamin D is, and we have to stop looking at it like it's a vitamin. It's acts in the body just like a hormone. And so if you have hormones that are way out of whack, what happens? Your whole body's out of whack. Why do we think any different about vitamin D? So we should be prioritizing, maybe not getting naked in the backyard like Jimmy Moore does, but prioritizing at least getting skin exposure of vitamin D around midday to the sun to get that vitamin D, supplementing with vitamin D and doing all the things to protect ourselves. I'm really happy that you were able to help your son out, Kelly. That's awesome. Kay says, I supplement 10K every day. I have some liquid that I put in my coffee. That's really cool. And if you get vitamin D, like the study said, don't forget about magnesium because that helps as well, especially if you're insulin resistant, you have high insulin levels. That high insulin levels is depleting your body of magnesium, which makes it hard for the vitamin D to do what it has to do. So get your magnesium up, get your vitamin D up. And some people like to add K2, vitamin K2. So sometimes you can get a vitamin D3, K2 kind of combo drug. So make sure you get vitamin K in there as well. My son in the Army recently fell and hurt his hip. I'm concerned his vitamin D levels were low because of years of video game playing indoors, says Kira. Yeah, we're not encouraging kids to go outside and play and get that sunlight exposure. And it does come with a price that vitamin D levels do go lower. And I wonder how many of the kids dealing with like depression in childhood is because their vitamin D levels are low. I'm hoping these studies, they're related to COVID-19 and trying to get people to use vitamin D as a prophylactic against COVID-19 to show them the correlation. I hope at least that maybe coming on people's radar screens makes them realize, oh my gosh, it's not just about COVID-19, it's about all health. And you're right to be concerned, Kira. Have him get a vitamin D test done and see where he stands. And if you've never had your vitamin D test done, it's easy, guys. It's a simple blood test. You know what your vitamin D level is, and then you can act appropriately. And I would say if it's anything under 50, you should probably start on 10,000 IU for a period of time. Somebody mentioned they had a 7, Kelly did. Her son had a 7. If you take 10,000 IU a day along with getting some sun for 6 months, that 7 should become over 50 pretty quick within that 6-month period. And if it doesn't, then you keep on with the regimen. It will get up there. And my last vitamin D test was 68, which I like it to be somewhere between 60 and 90. That's just my sweet spot. So I don't mind taking very high doses. I don't mind getting out buck naked in my backyard, getting sunshine on my skin, because all of those things provide really good protection for me. And guys, I never get sick. I don't get sick. I haven't had much of anything in a little while. Nothing that I couldn't handle. The only exceptions are those 2 times that I got tired that I think I might have been exposed to COVID-19 and my body fought it off. But that's it. Wasn't enough to go to the doctor about. So, all right. Thank you, Facebook. Let's pop over here now to my YouTube channel, see what they have to say. What brand of vitamin D do you take? Says just Anna. I'm not a brand person. I do like the Wild Superfoods. My buddy Abel James, who is on here, wildsuperfoods.com. He not only has vitamin D, I think his is 2,000 IU of the vitamin D, but it also has A, E, and K. So A, D, E, and K. It's got all the complex of the fat-soluble vitamins. So eat enough fat, have 5 of these, which is what I do, to get 10,000 IU of the vitamin D, but then you get all the benefits from the other things as well. So Wild Superfoods is the one that I've been using lately. I do need to get some more. I am out, so I will likely go out and try to find some vitamin D gel caps. Just be careful if you get a vitamin D gel cap that you don't get one that has soybean oil. They are sneaky like that, putting a crappy oil in a really good, healthy vitamin like that. So try to find one with olive oil or coconut oil, MCT oil, just not soybean oil. Abel says, I soaked up about 20 minutes of Colorado morning sunshine. Thankfully, the wildfire smoke is letting up a bit. Well, yeah, that's been rough out there on the West Coast. Craig says, Dr. Rhonda Patrick, I love her, had a lot to say about vitamin D on Joe Rogan's podcast, if you're interested in learning more. Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of people that know a whole lot more about vitamin D than Jimmy Moore, but I definitely love bringing the knowledge I do have. Millie says, it is remarkable to me what Mother Nature will provide you. Vitamin D is also very preventative for cancer as well. We must look at prophylactic use of natural remedies. Exactly. PJB says last vitamin D in November 2019 was 59. That's pretty good. Getting tested again this November, have bumped up vitamin D intake, want to get to the 80s. That's an admirable goal. Melissa says, I've been taking all those vitamins, also vitamin C in pure organic powder form. Yeah, my buddy Abel, he has this thing called Fizzy Z that he has at wildsuperfoods.com. So it's basically a buffered vitamin C and other bioflavonoids. So really good stuff. I want to see more nerdy content. Christy, I try to go nerdy every once in a while. Sometimes those studies, though, like I'm not a science guy by nature. I was an English guy. And so when I get into some of those words and I'm like, so it's not that I don't want to read the nerdy stuff. It's just it makes it difficult to read. And I know that it's hard to translate it to people that aren't as nerdy as someone like yourself, for example. Melissa says Dr. Boz had her dad getting in tanning bed daily to help him absorb vitamin D. That's interesting. That's a good thing. That's cool. Harpsy said I would study D toxicity as well, making sure you have a good level. When I ate cod liver while still supplementing D3K2, my thirst became unbearable. I got cramps. Well, that's why testing your level to know where you stand is so important. So I tested at 79, she said, after feeling normal again. Good. Harpsy said it took about 3 years to build up to the problems that started in my lower back. Well, good. I'm glad you were able to resolve it. Shirley says I have a D3K2 supplement, but I'm always forgetting to take it. I probably take it twice a week. Well, try to take it daily if you can. And just put it out on the counter. They sell these little pill boxes this Monday through Sunday. So just stick them in there, and then just when it's your day, just open it up. You won't ever forget. Craig says, if Dr. Fauci comes out and tells everyone to go to the beach and get the sun, my head's going to explode. It's coming. It's coming. No, I'm just kidding. We need a lot more conversations about research on vitamin D, says Abel. Yes, Abel, we do. And it's something that it's not new. Like, we've known about vitamin D for a very long time, but it's so funny. Like, we have knowledge about things, but we don't always apply that knowledge and take what we know. Like, it's one thing to know, take vitamin D for this, this, and this. It's one thing to know CBD oil can be helpful for this, this, and this. It's one thing to know that if you eat more probiotic foods in your diet, it'll do this, this, and this. But you can know all those things all day long. But if you don't do them, are you really helping yourself? Knowledge doesn't mean anything until you apply that knowledge so you get the benefit of that knowledge. And now today you guys have lots of knowledge about 2 more incredible studies that have come out all about vitamin D and its impact on COVID-19 and the COVID-19 risk. 2 studies, guys, just came out hot off the presses. One of them just came out Friday. See, I keep you cutting edge of what's coming out there. And so I'm going to keep doing that here on Jimmy Rants. And that's it for this episode of Jimmy Rants. JimmyRants.com is the website. And as always, you can engage live in the content. Go follow me right here on Instagram. I am at Livin' Low Carb Man, LIVINLOWCARBMAN. Once you're there, engage live. We are here Monday through Friday, all throughout the week at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. So appreciate you being here today on Jimmy Rants. We also simulcast over on my Facebook page. So thank you guys for being here, as well as over on my YouTube channel. Look at all those people on YouTube. I love you guys all for being here on Jimmy Rants. If you missed the live, you can watch it on replay over on IGTV right here on Instagram. So be sure to check that out. It will go up shortly after the show is over. We also throw it up over on YouTube, generally about an hour or so after the show is over. It shows up on YouTube on replay. And then finally, the best of the best, everything that you could ever want to know about Jimmy Rants is at the official website for Jimmy Rants at JimmyRants.com. Go check that out, you guys. See all the past episodes there. But most importantly, if you like what I do here, you like that I keep you on the cutting edge, definitely reward me for that by supporting my work, either through Patreon. A monthly donation would be great. You get all kinds of perks for that. So be sure to go and support me that way. Or if you want to do a one-time donation, then you can do that through PayPal. I had this very sweet lady, you guys, before we get out of here. I had this very sweet lady wrote me through Facebook the other day. I'm a big fan of your Jimmy Rant show. I'm so grateful for what you're doing. Can I mail you something? Of course, I get people asking for my mailing address all the time. Sometimes they send something they handmade. Sometimes it's a card. Sometimes it's all kinds of things. This came in the mail on Friday, maybe Saturday. I forget exactly when it came in. And she sent me a whole lot of money. Like, I was like, what? And it was just so generous. And it just reminded me that people appreciate you and people reward you when you do good things and when you're doing good. It was several $100s. And so I was blown away. And it has been a tough year for me financially because of the COVID-19 stuff. Has kind of messed up a little bit of my business model for how I earn a living and am able to keep the lights on. But that was just a reminder, you guys, of how important the work is, that other people see the value in it to the point that they would put their money where their mouth is. Now, I know a lot of people are struggling. I've had many of you guys say, I love what you do, but I can't really do anything. Don't worry about it. I'm okay. I'm being very well taken care of and blessed. So, but if you do have the means and you are getting good content out of this, consider making a donation. It really does help me, and it helps encourage me that, okay, I'm providing content you find value in. And so thank you so much for being here today. Again, JimmyRants.com is the official website. Go check it out. And until tomorrow, you guys, we will see you then. All right.